find it kind of ironic that I'm reviewing the 24th episode of the second series based on the story of the same name from the Railway series but tramway engines, because it's called Ghost Train, and when you think of ghosts at Christmas time, you always associate it with a Christmas carol. I mean, ghosts coming to visit you at Christmas Eve, but enough about that. We're here to talk about arguably one of the greatest episodes of the TV series, as well as the first ghost-themed episode of the show, Ghost Train. Percy tells Thomas and Toby a story of a ghost train that his driver saw the night before. However, Thomas does not believe a word of it and calls Percy a silly little engine. Percy later tells his driver that Thomas did not believe in the ghosts, and the driver explains that it was only a pretend ghost story on television. That evening, Percy is returning to the sheds from the harbour. Despite being dark, Percy knows exactly where he is and enjoys running at night. However, he is unaware that a cart full of lime is stuck on the tracks at the level crossing ahead. While Sam the farmer has gone for help, Percy comes down the line, destroying the cart, and is left completely covered in lime. Percy runs to the nearest signal box, where he meets Toby, and his driver explains to the signalman what happened. The signalman arranges to sort out the hazard on the line, but suggests Percy be cleaned up, as he looks like a ghost. This gives Percy an idea to scare Thomas, and asks not to be cleaned until he plays his trick. Toby agrees to help and sets off. At the sheds, Thomas is being prepared for his evening train when Toby arrives and tells him that Percy was involved in an accident. Thomas is mildly concerned for Percy, but more worried that this will make him late. Toby tells him that the line has been cleared, but that he thinks he saw Percy's ghost saying it was coming to warn them. Thomas is unconcerned and tells Toby not to worry. After this, however, a ghostly voice comes from outside demanding to be let in. Thomas is frightened as the shed doors open and reveal what appears to be Percy's ghost. Thomas pretends not to be terrified, says he is late, and quickly runs off to collect Danny and Clarabelle. Even after he has finished his run, he is so scared that he does not return to the shed for the rest of the night. The next morning, Thomas meets Toby at the station. When Toby asks Thomas where he has been, Thomas reveals that he spent the night in the goods shed, claiming he knew Toby would be sad about Percy's demise and did not wish to intrude. As he makes his excuse, Thomas hears Percy's whistle in the distance and runs off. Percy, who is now cleaned up and none the worse for his adventure, arrives, having heard everything. Percy cannot help but feel pleased as Toby remarks that Thomas is acting as if he had seen a ghost. This is the very first ghost-themed episode for the TV series, and it's an ongoing trope that would carry on throughout the TV series. It's also the 50th episode of the TV series that was ever made. Very few people bring that up when they talk about this episode, but I think it's worth bringing up because 50 episodes is quite a milestone for a TV series. And the episode is just oozing with creepy atmosphere. It's a really well done ghost-themed episode for a TV series in the 1980s. And that ghost train theme that Mike O'Donnell and Junior Campbell composed is just so creepy when you re-listen to it. Even though I don't really watch horror movies or slasher movies, this really does sound like something that could have come out of an 80s horror movie. It's just oozing with creepiness and adds to the creep me out parts of the episode. And I also think it's a tune that you don't want your kids listening to alone in the dark. And it once again shows off Thomas's prattish side, as he shows very little concern for Percy and is more worried about being late for his train when he hears that Percy's had an accident.
"Percy's had an accident," cried Toby. "Poor engine," said Thomas. "Botheration! That means I'll be late."
What a dick. And that moment when Percy comes to the shed and scares Thomas by reciting the line from the Three Little Pigs with Toby's help, that scared face that Thomas makes used to scare me a lot when I was a kid. Like with Pop Goes the Diesel, it was never to the point where it made me stop watching the episode and not go for it for years, because it's an episode that I really loved. Whenever I watched it on VHS as a kid, I just always used to cover my eyes as soon as Percy started doing his ghostly voice, because I knew that face was coming. I think it has something to do with the fact that it's a close-up shot and it comes right in your face, and the fact that it just comes out of nowhere when you least expect it the first time round. But even when you know it's coming after watching it several years later, it still looks really creepy. In fact, I'd probably say that it's almost scarier than Thomas's O-face from Series 1. Oh, by the way, that makes its final appearance in this episode. So from this episode on, no more O-face. Rest in peace, O-face. And it's worth mentioning that when Percy and Toby play their ghostly trick on Thomas, they recite the line from the tale Three Little Pigs.
Hee, hee, hip, 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 hee. Let me in, let me in, wailed Percy. No, no, not by the smoke of my chimney, chim, chim. I'll chuff and I'll puff and I'll break your door in.
I imagine when Disney fans rewatch this episode, the first thing that comes to their mind is the Disney short Three Little Pigs. It's just funny how the TV series as well as the Railway series can put fairy tale references in their stories. It also gives us one of Sir Ringo Starr's best performances in the TV series. He really does sell those spooky moments, and Toby's acting when he's helping Percy with his ghostly trick. It just shows how far Ringo had come throughout the series since the first series of the show. How much oomph and energy he really gave into his performance in this series. And this episode is another testament to that. Rewatching the episode, it seems like one of the most adult episodes of the series. Which is kind of fitting because this was the final book Robert Aldry wrote. It was as if he was following his readers as they were growing up. So the Railway series technically started growing up along with the people who read them from the start. And this was also the first time we get to see the real creepy atmos of Sodor. Especially with that fog machine covering up the fields in Crow's Farm Crossing. And that scene with the viaduct at night and the ghost train puffing through is just an awesome image. And when you see that ghost train for the first time in the opening of the episode when Percy's telling his story to Thomas and Toby, it just looks really creepy the way the sheet on top of the engine just flaps about in the wind. Especially when it goes past the watermill and the full moon. It just adds to the creepiness of the story. It really shows how far the TV series team had come at that point. Being able to make fog effects and making creepy scenes look really realistic and creepy. It's really amazing to watch years later. And as I said, the ghost train theme just really adds to the creepy atmos of the story. The team really had pushed the limits of what they could do with their model sets, as well as the technology that they had at the time. And I think this is also worth pointing out for this episode. There's a deleted scene where Terence the tractor pulls the cartload of lime, but then has trouble getting it over the crossing. Whereas in the Railway series book, it was a horse that had trouble getting the cart across the crossing. A minor detail, but it is amazing that they were going to give Terence the tractor a cameo in this story. Ghost Train is one of the most iconic episodes of the TV series, as well as being the first ghost-themed episode as well. It's an episode that can be watched any time of the year, but I'm sure a lot of fans would watch it around Halloween time. I know I do, along with a lot of the other classic creepy episodes. It's an episode that I highly would recommend checking out on Halloween and all the year round. You'll enjoy the creepy atmos, the amazing effects and sets that the TV show had to offer in this episode, and it's just a fun episode as well as being spooky. It's definitely worth a watch.